Welcome to Reboot Body AI.
Welcome to the debate. Today we're discussing vitamin A, a critical fat-soluble nutrient that's essential for some really complex physiological functions. We're talking everything from, the basic processes of vision to proper cellular differentiation and even robust immune responses.
And it's a fascinating topic because the source material really forces us to confront how we get this nutrient. Vitamin A, or retinol, and its active forms, it comes from two fundamentally distinct dietary pathways. You have preformed vitamin A, which is found almost exclusively in animal products like liver, fish, and dairy.
Right.
And then you have the provitamin A carotenoids, predominantly beta-carotene, which you find in your yellow, orange, and dark green vegetables.
And that metabolic distinction is just so crucial. These two forms are handled so differently by the body, which leads us directly to our central disagreement today. So the core question we're debating is this. When we're trying to optimize vitamin A status in let's say, a generally healthy population, should public health messaging and dietary guidelines prioritize the high efficiency and predictable delivery of preformed vitamin A? Or should we focus on the strictly regulated conversion and the inherent safety profile offered by the provitamin A carotenoids?
I think when we're looking at population-wide recommendations, prudence really has to prevail over precision. So my position is that we must prioritize the provitamin A carotenoids. They offer these unparalleled safety mechanisms, and on top of that, they're linked to a broader spectrum of health benefits from the intact carotenoid molecules themselves.
Okay, I see why you'd emphasize safety, but let me offer the perspective that's really rooted in physiological necessity and measurable intake. My argument rests squarely on reliability and efficiency. Preformed vitamin A is just highly absorbable. It generally boasts absorption rates between, 70 and 90%. This predictability is why in many developed societies, this single source provides the vast majority, often over 70%, of the average person's daily vitamin A intake.
And that consistent intake certainly does contribute to an adequate status, yeah.
But it's more critical than that. Preformed retinol is the only way to reliably and efficiently maintain our substantial long-term hepatic reserves. That's the vitamin A stored in the liver. These can reach up to 1,400 micrograms per gram in healthy adults. I mean, these reserves are the body's buffer. They're essential not just for vision, but for ensuring the continuous availability of retinoic acid for things like gene transcription and cell differentiation. So relying heavily on provitamin carotenoids, it's problematic because their conversion efficiency to retinol is just notoriously variable. It's highly influenced by factors outside of just calories, like how the food is processed, the presence of fat. For consistent, predictable nutritional programming, preformed sources are simply the superior, more reliable lever.
I understand the desire for that high degree of certainty, but that certainty requires managing a really narrow safety margin. Provitamin A carotenoids are, I would argue, biologically superior for general intake precisely because they function both as precursors to retinol and as intact bioactive compounds. They're strongly associated with a decreased risk of some very serious chronic diseases, cardiovascular events, certain cancers, and age-related macular degeneration.
And we certainly can't just dismiss those epidemiological associations. No. But the decisive advantage, especially for public health advice, is their safety profile. The body possesses this brilliant regulationary mechanism. It tightly controls the enzyme that splits beta-carotene into retinol. So when your vitamin A stores in the liver are sufficient, this conversion process naturally downregulates. It essentially slams the brakes on any excessive retinol synthesis. This makes it virtually impossible to cause hypervitaminosis A, that's toxicity, simply by eating a diet rich in carrots or sweet potatoes. Preformed vitamin A, however, it has no such biological gatekeeper, and so it necessitates a hard limit, a tolerable upper intake level, or UL, set at 3,000 micrograms RAE per day, precisely because of severe risks like liver toxicity and teratogenicity.
That's a powerful point about biological control, but it brings us straight back to the difficulty of even achieving adequacy. If the regulatory goal is to ensure the recommended dietary allowance, the RDA, is met consistently, we're talking 700 to 900 micrograms of retinol activity equivalent, or RAE per day, the immense variability of plant sources makes that guarantee almost impossible.
You keep highlighting the variability, but maybe let's quantify that challenge for the audience.
Well, the challenge is shocking, really. We used to rely on older, pretty simplistic conversion factors. But modern, gold standard techniques, specifically the paired deuterated retinol dilution test, the DRD test, they've revealed that the true conversion rate in humans is dramatically lower and frankly wildly unstable depending on the food matrix.
And could you briefly explain what that DRD test actually measures?
Of course, the DRD test is a sophisticated method. It involves labeling the carotenoid compound and then measuring how much of that label actually shows up in the bloodstream as retinol over time. It gives us a real-world, in vivo measure of conversion, not some theoretical calculation. And what it shows is, well, it's chaos. Conversion factors for beta-carotene can range from an efficient 3.6 to 1 RAE in specially engineered crops like golden rice, all the way up to 28 to 1, I believe, in some vegetables. Precisely. 28 to 1 ratio in certain unprocessed leafy vegetables. So just think about that. If a dietitian is trying to make sure a patient meets their 700 microgram RDA solely through plants, and that source shifts from a sweet potato, maybe a 6 to 1 ratio, to raw spinach, which might be 20 to 1, well, the entire nutritional calculation is instantly invalidated. We've seen data showing that 27 micrograms of beta-carotene from some green-yellow vegetables were only equivalent to 1 single microgram of retinol. This level of uncertainty means that relying primarily on carotenoids really compromises the certainty of adequate long-term status.
I would actually frame that observation not as an argument against carotenoids, but as an argument against trusting calculated RAE values from plants universally. The extreme variability you're citing only proves that calculating exact retinol equivalence is unreliable and, highly dependent on things like cooking and processing. So for a generally healthy person, the safest and most robust strategy is to focus on consuming diverse, whole foods, carrots, spinach, squash, that contain these provitamin A sources, eaten with fat, of course, knowing that the body's own innate downregulation mechanism will handle the conversion. We should leverage the system's wisdom.
But what about populations where the body's wisdom just isn't sufficient? We can't set general dietary guidance that completely ignores massive public health needs. Deficiency states are still a pervasive global crisis. It affects an estimated 1/3 of all children under 5. And this leads to clinical signs like xerophthalmia, night blindness, and drastically increased rates of childhood mortality.
I absolutely agree that vitamin A deficiency is a severe public health problem that needs urgent action.
And in those situations, where you need rapid replenishment to prevent permanent damage, only high-dose, preformed vitamin A supplementation has proven rapid efficacy. For instance, the established treatment for xerophthalmia requires doses around 200,000 IU. If we let the fear of the upper limit universally over-caution against preformed sources, we compromise the essential ability to treat or prevent conditions that lead to permanent blindness and death. The necessity for these high-dose, preformed interventions really demonstrates its fundamental metabolic superiority when the system is challenged.
That is a compelling argument for preformed retinol's role in crisis intervention and for targeting severely deficient populations. I'll grant you that. However, our debate is focused on dietary optimization for a generally healthy population. And for this group, we have to weigh the utility of rapid replenishment against the risk of chronic, dangerous toxicity.
And what specifically worries you about toxicity in a healthy, non-deficient population?
The danger of exceeding that UL of 3,000 micrograms RAE per day, especially through fortified foods and supplements, is profound because retinol bypasses that crucial biological gatekeeper. When your binding proteins get saturated, free circulating retinol can cause severe chronic effects. The most critical, in my view, is teratogenicity, the risk of causing birth defects. Retinol intake above 4,500 micrograms RAE per day is associated with an increased risk of developmental anomalies, particularly during the first trimester of pregnancy. That is a risk that simply does not exist when you rely on food-derived carotenoids.
I accept the teratogenicity risk is paramount, absolutely, particularly for women of reproductive age.
And we also have to learn from the clinical trial data on high-dose supplementation.
You'll recall the studies that involved smokers or former asbestos workers who took these mega doses of beta-carotene supplements. The completely unexpected finding was an increased risk of lung cancer and total mortality. This suggests that when you isolate and ingest these compounds in non-physiologic high amounts, they can actually act as pro-oxidants under specific high-stress conditions. So food-derived carotenoids are demonstrably protective. High-dose, isolated supplements, whether they're preformed retinol or beta-carotene, they carry a demonstrated non-trivial risk. And that argues for prioritizing the safety of the whole food source.
You're relying heavily on the regulatory safety and the benefits of the whole food approach. But let's circle back to the mechanics of absorption. I mean, you have to acknowledge that the high variability we discussed is compounded by a dependency on other dietary factors. The studies are very clear. The absorption of carotenoids is fundamentally dependent on dietary fat.
That's correct. Fat is a requirement.
It is more than a requirement. It's a massive variable. Absorption has been shown to increase dramatically from a meager 5% up to 25% with the simple addition of a small amount of oil to a meal. For individuals on, say, calorie-restricted or low-fat diets, or those with fat malabsorption syndromes, the assumed benefits and guaranteed RAEs from a plant source can just plummet overnight. Preformed vitamin A's high absorption efficiency, 70 to 90%, remains nearly constant regardless of this. It makes it a foundationally superior component for ensuring nutritional stability. So how can a recommendation that relies on such a volatile variable truly be prioritized?
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it a little differently. The fact that the absorption of provitamin A carotenoids is so reliant on fat, to me highlights that achieving optimal vitamin A status through plants is intrinsically tied to achieving a better overall diet.
That seems like an idealistic shift in focus. We're talking about guaranteed nutrient delivery.
But the two are inseparable. By requiring the consumption of vitamin A-rich foods like leafy greens, carrots, or squash as part of a balanced meal that contains healthy fats, whether from olive oil, avocados, or the fat naturally present in eggs or fish, well, we're promoting holistic dietary practices that serve long-term health far better than just trying to hit a numerical RAE target with a single high-efficiency source. We can absolutely use animal sources for a guaranteed baseline retinol, but the bulk of our intake should come from the safe, regulated, and beneficial carotenoids.
In the end, though, while provitamin A carotenoids are undeniably safer and, yes, they carry distinct health benefits, they introduce an immense and, I would argue, unacceptable level of uncertainty in achieving documented vitamin A adequacy. This is all due to those variable conversion rates tied to the food matrix and external factors like fat. For precision in nutrient intake and for a guaranteed physiological supply, especially to maintain those essential liver reserves, preformed vitamin A just remains the fundamentally more effective component for predictable nutritional programming.
And I believe the evidence compels us to respect the profound biological regulation the body employs. For a healthy individual, prioritizing provitamin A sources from diverse whole foods is simply the most prudent and ethically sound dietary strategy. This approach ensures vitamin A needs are met via a biologically regulated process which effectively circumvents the severe risk of hypervitaminosis A that's inherent to excessive preformed retinol, and it fully capitalizes on the established associations between carotenoid-rich diets and chronic disease prevention.
The tension between the need for predictable nutritional delivery and the absolute necessity for biological safety mechanisms, it clearly defines the complexity of optimizing this particular nutrient.
Indeed. The data simply underscore the challenge of setting reliable dietary guidelines when two distinct forms of the same essential nutrient are handled with such dramatically different metabolic consequences by the human body.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.